Today we're gonna talk about yellow paint. Okay, more than just yellow paint, but we'll start with that since it's such a hot topic. We're gonna be talking about how game design can control what the player does and how they play the game, and I'll pull the curtain back on some of these game design elements. In the last 40 years or so, this idea has evolved a lot. Let's go back to the beginning, back to where it all started. The player is on the left side of the screen. There is stuff on the right side of the screen. The player wants to go see it. The player moves, the screen goes right, but it does not go back. Boom. Now the player knows 90% of the progression for the game. This wonderfully accessible form of guiding the player works great, as almost anyone will be able to understand the purpose of the game. Now, jump forward 40 years. Guiding the player through game design has become a full field in itself, and it's hard. Each genre has their own tropes that have had decades of testing and refinement while being built upon the foundations of previous games. But, as gaming has become such a mainstream hobby, this can cause some issues. Picture this. Your non-gamer mother decides she wants to try some video games. She picks up the controller and reads the title.
Oh, Dark Souls. That sounds fun.
That might be a bit of an extreme example, but the chances of her understanding and enjoying that experience is rather low. But let's look at some more basic examples. Red barrel in front of a cave with crude scrap wood blocking it. Gamers know to blow up the barrel, clear the way. But newly gamer mom? No idea. Another. This progression of colors. Grey, white, green, blue, purple, yellow or orange. I bet half of you could already tell me what that sequence of colors represents. But to newly gamer mum, those colors have no meaning in this context. While I'm certainly not saying these game design choices are wrong, we need both game designers and players to understand that not everyone has the same understanding of genres, or gaming at all, and we should try and design around this idea when we can. And this is where yellow paint comes in. This is pretty much one step behind having a giant flashing arrow saying, "Go here." A few people seem to have the opinion that it's a bad thing, but let me tell you why they're kind of wrong. As games get bigger and, more importantly, broader, it gets harder to curate an experience for the player. So the designers implement these guiding elements to help the player know what to do. And ideally, these elements blend in with the world and they all get noticed subconsciously, and everyone lived happily ever after, the end. Unfortunately, it can't always work like that. While getting player feedback on my game, Silent Morning, check out the free demo if you like horror, thank you. One of the issues I found was about 30% of players couldn't figure out what to do at some point in the game. Even following all these diegetic guiding game design elements like audio prompts, color, lighting, environmental cues, and many more, I'll explain these a bit later, it still wasn't enough. And the worst feeling for me wasn't getting negative feedback, but seeing feedback like, "Hey, the game looks awesome, the vibe was amazing, but I couldn't figure out what to do, so I gave up." I wanted everyone to understand the goals and enjoy the game. So I had to make a change. I added yellow paint. Not actual yellow paint, mind you. I just added a quest system that tells a player their current goal and whether they've completed that goal. Now I'd say about 99% of players get to experience the game as I designed it. Does it reduce immersion? Yeah, slightly. Is it useless for a lot of players? Yeah, also yeah. Was it still the right choice? In my opinion, most definitely. And I think the same thing is true for games which literally use yellow paint. It made the game accessible in a way that's not often thought about. But don't get me wrong, there are less intrusive ways of doing it, but arguably the less intrusive and the less obvious the effect, the less useful it is. And in this economy of attention, game designers can't afford for people to get lost or not understand. Now, let's have a look at some specific game design elements that are used to control the player without them really noticing. The best design aspects are more ingrained in human psychology rather than gamer psychology. Composition. Photographers and artists have centuries of experience on us game developers, so we're going to borrow some of their techniques when we're designing our game. Rule of thirds. You don't want the screen to be too busy. If the UI takes up 1/3 of the screen, don't put the important world objects behind that UI. Use leading lines to draw the attention to certain areas, and lighting and shadows lets the player ignore some things while focusing on others, and many other photographical techniques. If you treat the player like a floating camera, which half the time they are, then you can use composition to communicate an idea without explicitly telling that to the player. Allure. Humans are naturally curious, and just like a magpie, they're going to go check out that shiny thing. Game designers take advantage of this. After using composition to make sure you've seen it, they will make the most interesting and alluring thing on screen be the area you need to go. Bringing it back to Silent Morning, when you spawn in, there is a cabin, with the front door dead ahead of you. Everything else in frame is just forest. This immediately tells the player to go check out the cabin. A more professional example is Breath of the Wild. Once you finish the basic tutorial, you get a beautiful landscape shot, with Hyrule Castle in center shot. The player is now thinking, ooh, I want to go there. Then, the screen pans to a church that's much closer as a man walks towards the church. So now the player's thinking, well, I guess I'll go there first. And that's exactly what the designers wanted to communicate. Affordance and Anti-Affordance. This is all about access and interaction. Many games can be a bit too liberal with this one. It's about using the environment and objects to either deny or allow access to an area and show the player that something can be done there. The classic example of this is a game that blocks a path with a shopping trolley or similar object. The player very quickly learns that that path is no longer an option, and future shopping trolleys will have the same effect. Or they can block the path and force the player to interact with the trolley to move it out the way, and then use this feature for the remaining game. Funnily enough, being in the horror genre, I subverted the use of anti-affordance in my game, with a tree that blocks most of the path away from the cabin. Most players assume you can't get past, but the few that test it get an incredibly uneasy feeling as they explore past the trees, as it feels like they shouldn't be there. But a few secret voice lines show them it was on purpose. But now I can't use a tree to block a path properly, as subverting the subversion will make the player feel cheated. The joys of game design. Environmental clues. The hidden note, crumbling wall, footsteps in the mud. All these elements tell the player what to do, but make them feel smart while doing it. Skyrim's dungeons are an example of this. Symbols on the wall, some symbols you can interact with, and a lever in front of a door. Most players figure out they need to match up the symbols, good to go. Pressure plate on the floor, scorch marks all around it. That's a fire trap. It's the subtle clues that players aren't forced to follow, but are rewarded for paying attention that gets them really focused and immersed in the game. Although, you do have to be careful with this one, as not everyone is going to understand, and this can lead to frustration with some players. Breadcrumbs. The player needs confirmation they're doing the right thing, otherwise they'll begin to doubt themselves and what they're doing. This is very different from genre to genre, but for example, you've got coins in platformers. If you walked into an area with no coins, no enemies, no dialogue, you'd start to doubt you're in the right area. Maybe you've been here before, maybe you're here too early. This will confuse the player, and they may backtrack or get further lost, leading to more frustration. In Silent Morning, voice lines are the breadcrumbs. They let the player know they're on track. They hint at what to do next, and tell you when you're done with your current action. Now these are only a few of the possible game design elements that control how a player behaves, and I've tried to show off the ones that are less genre specific. If we went through all of them, we'd be here for hours. So I'll put a few links in the description to some articles you can read if you're interested. And for those who stuck around all the way to the end, thank you so much. I'm a solo developer with a passion for sharing game design knowledge. So if you're into that, it'd be awesome if you could subscribe. The links to my game will also be in the description for those who have an interest in horror. Thank you for watching.